Today we're going to look at control in business, and specifically we're going to take a look at balanced scorecards and the financial and non-financial systems and strategies, as the subtitle suggests. We're going to take a look at how the balanced scorecard balances, just like suggested there, financial and non-financial systems. We're going to take a look at strategy maps and how managers and executives can effectively use strategy maps in terms of a control system in business. When we're talking about organizational control, we are talking about management and how management has authority over various levels of direct reports underneath of them, and the various levels that the organization has in its organizational chart. There's a nice quote here that I have on the board. Essentially, organizations must develop an environment that encourages and fosters the ability to achieve organizational objectives, even though the desired outcomes may seem to be contradictory. And what this suggests, to me at least, is that the organizations out there must be doing more to make sure that the control within the business and within the organization is focused on external and internal factors, and that they are not focused solely on financial measures. And we're going to talk a bit about financial measures and non-financial measures once we start looking at the balanced scorecard. Interestingly enough, organizational control has developed quite significantly over time. We're looking at what we expect with a CEO perhaps on the top of an organizational chart, with maybe some assistants or directors of different departments below him or her, and so on and so forth throughout the various levels. But when we're looking at this different control and these different charts, how do we measure the success of the different departments? And that's what we're going to focus on today, because there's certainly a lot of different approaches. We're going to look specifically at the balanced scorecard, and in looking at the balanced scorecard, we're going to look at how the financial measures, which have traditionally been how employees and departments and businesses have been measured, how those financial measures might be juxtaposed against, or, as the name suggests, balanced with non-financial measures. The non-financial measures, of course, we will be talking about many internal and external measures focused on customer satisfaction mainly, but there are some other areas, and we're going to take a look at that. But first we have to look at what the balanced scorecard actually is. Now, as this quote suggests, the balanced scorecard is a useful tool for motivating employees and focusing their attention on factors that are deemed to be critical to long-term performance rather than simply short-term financial results. The balanced scorecard was developed by Kaplan and focuses a lot on strategy maps and balancing four different parts of business. Of course, the first is financial. Secondly, we would look at customers. Then we would look at the internal processes, and then the organizational capacity. And the organizational capacity in terms of knowledge and innovation, learning and growth perspectives. And so we would use strategic objectives, strategy maps, and other performance measures and targets that would help us measure the four different quadrants of this balanced scorecard. So let's take a look first of all at why we might need a balanced scorecard rather than taking specifically measures from a financial viewpoint. And as you can see here, financial is still one of the quadrants that we will be looking at in the balanced scorecard, but why not just financial? When we're talking about financial measurements, we're considering various traditional measurements that, sales, profitability, those kind of things. And when we're looking specifically just at those things, they're very limiting. what'll happen is we're going to look at short-term gains. So, for instance, one of the things that, in my experience, I've found is that everybody who has a goal set for them will, one way or another, achieve that goal, and in doing so, they may avoid certain things, certain tasks that should have been implemented along the way. Of course, we set targets and goals to achieve certain milestones, but those milestones should have a pathway that leads us through various points of interest that allow us to navigate this business world in an ethical and moral way. But the pressures that are put on us through profit and sales targets could lead to a very short-term outlook at business, and so in giving simply financial targets, what would happen is we'll meet those financial targets, but perhaps we'll manipulate the system a bit, manipulate the numbers to make it look like we met those targets, and so you get a lot of this when we're focusing just on these targets. The other thing is, and I currently work at a private career college. One of our measurements, of course, is the number of students who are admitted to the programs, and with an increase in students, there is, of course, an increase in sales. From a business perspective, it makes sense to have more students enrolled. But the problem is, of course, long term, is that if we enroll just any student, perhaps some students are not academically prepared or academically ready to tackle college. And because of this, what we have is classrooms that have dynamics that are not conducive to the learning environment for other students. So because we're focused so much on sales, what we are losing focus on is our client. And of course, the client in a private career college is, in fact, the student. And so when we can't provide for the client, we miss out on what could be a long-term goal. Referrals, for instance, a student might refer like-minded friends of his or hers who could then enroll in the program in the future. And when we're not focusing on customer service, of course, another danger is that we have dropout rates that are increasing. So just by focusing on sales, we have a bit of a problem that could occur if it's only numbers and money that we're looking at. In my research, I came across an interesting story that suggests that in Israel, the 6 daycare centers imposed a fine on parents who were late picking up their children. They hoped that the fine, monetary, would dissuade parents from showing up late, but in fact parents responded by showing up late twice as often. Even when the centers revoked the fine after 12 weeks, the parents' tardiness persisted. Instead of appealing to their sense of common good, the fee caused parents to assume that paying it made up for their lateness. It's an interesting look at how money justifies the the absence, perhaps, or the ignoring of morality or ethics. So it was very interesting to take a look at that. They go on to suggest that when mixing ethical and social motivations with the monetary motivations, it could have a much better result. And they had, let me see here, by contrast of the daycare example, there was a small tax on plastic grocery bags implemented in Ireland. And when they did that, they had a strong public education campaign with the message, "Don't trash the Emerald Isle." The appeal to the common good combined with the fee reduced plastic bag consumption by 94% in just 2 weeks. So what this suggests is that balancing monetary controls with ethical and social controls has a much better long-term effect on business or on any type of situation, and it's not just, of course, in business that we're limited by these short-term goals of monetary settings. And so it's interesting to look at those two examples that I found in the writing. These two examples were taken from the Mendoca 2016 reference. So then we have to look about non-financial measures. And this slide suggests that most companies can benefit from a fuller understanding of the lead indicator strength of the non-financial metrics they use or could potentially use with strategic performance management frameworks. And what this suggests, as you can see in the strategy map, is that the financial perspective is not the only thing we should be looking at when focusing on business and organizational controls. So some of the things here, and this is a Kaplan-Norton strategy map, and it looks at customer perspective, the price, the quality, availability, etc., and then the internal perspective, which might be things like operations management, customer management, those types of things, and then the learning and growth perspective, where it talks about culture and leadership, alignment and teamwork and things like that. So what we have to pull out of this type of balanced scorecard is that the balancing of these four quadrants and these four perspectives is what will make a long-term strategy rather than a short-term financial strategy. So how do we measure these things? Of course, we can measure customer perspective through customer feedback surveys. We can measure internal perspective through employee feedback surveys. And things such as that. Learning and growth perspective is what is the culture? How can we improve that culture? What kind of stories do we tell about our business, and how do we engage our employees in that kind of a culture? And furthermore, how do we take that culture and make it how do we make it more public so that our shareholders or stakeholders might be drawn into this culture, and how do we show our leadership and our teamwork, and how do we build teams within the organization? So the overall strategy map is important in this type of environment. So I guess the only question left then is how then would we measure finances, and how would we continue to have financial measurements within the organization without affecting this balanced scorecard? And so what we have to look at it is from a perspective of the shareholder, and how does the organization look to the shareholder in terms of finances? And so we can look at things like revenue growth. Is there new revenue? Are there different sources of revenue that we've been able to acquire throughout the year, throughout the quarter or the fiscal year? And improved profitability. So what in fact are we doing, and what measures are we taking to make sure that profitability is maximized? And then of course we can look at productivity. Are there measures that we're taking to decrease costs? And furthermore, are we using the resources we have in the most efficient manner? And can we show this to shareholders and stakeholders? So the balance, of course, here is that yes, we do need to look at finances, and we do need financial measures, and you certainly cannot run most businesses, if any, without considering financial controls. It's very important, obviously, for financial controls, but what's also important is the customer perspective, the internal perspective, and what kind of internal systems you have, and the learning and growth perspective. And when you put all those things together, it's what we call, and what Kaplan called and Norton called, the strategy map for a balanced scorecard. And with that balanced scorecard, of course, we are able to look more long term and try to implement strategies that will keep the business successful for a long time, rather than simply looking at financial perspectives quarter to quarter, or even week to week, month to month, which of course could be met, but in the grand scheme of things, perhaps won't do what's necessary to keep the business growing in this competitive external environment.